Hello, my name's Simon Walker and I'm doing my week 5 assignment, and what I'm looking at is mirroring EQ. I'm looking at two different parts here. I've got a piano part and I've got a violin part, and this is the plugin that I'm using. It's a Waves EQ. It's a 6-band EQ. In the violin part, I'm only using 4 of the 6 bands. Band 3 and band 4 I have deactivated. They're both set up the same in that I've got a high pass filter at the bottom end and I've got a low pass filter at the top end. And then with this one I'm using a low shelf to control this range here, and I'm using a high shelf to control the slightly higher frequencies. The piano chord EQ is set up very similarly, but as you can see, I have prioritized slightly different areas. So the violin part, I've cut all frequencies below basically about 450 hertz, and I'm really emphasizing this range here, which is where the sort of the glossy high-end texture of the violins comes from. So I'm really wanting to just give them a bit of punch in that area there. With the piano chords, I'm wanting to leave that space free for the violins to sound good in, and I'm really wanting to emphasize the lower, warmer end of the piano. So I've got a bit of a boost happening in this lower end of the spectrum here, using this filter here, which is set at around about 200 hertz. I've cut all the frequencies here again using a high pass filter, and I'm using with just a bit of boost to control the sort of around the 500-600 hertz range. This filter here around the 2K range is really important for piano. This is where a lot of the sound of the piano happens between 2K and 8K. So I'm just going to show you a bit of what happens with that as well, and how you can change the sort of fundamental sound of the instrument a bit as well. So what I'm just going to do is play this for you and show you what happens without EQ and what it sounds like with EQ when that's then added. So I'm just going to play this. It's got EQ on it at the start, and then I'm going to take it off. So here we go. So this is the piece. So you can hear they're quite nicely separated. Now I'm just going to take off the violin EQ. All of a sudden you can now start to hear the low end of the violins has really come and trodden right on the piano. And the piano, I'm just going to turn off the EQ of the piano. So you can hear the piano now sounds really quite thin, and the violin and the piano are in quite the same sonic spectrum. So I'm just going to turn back on the piano EQ. Just going to turn on the violin EQ. All of a sudden we can hear both instruments really clearly. I'm just going to show you what happens if I play with this frequency band here at around the 2000. I'm just going to cut it and listen to what happens to the piano. Really woollied up the sound. You can't actually hear much of the piano sound, and if I slide that further down you can hardly hear the piano at all. It doesn't sound like much of a piano anymore. So I'm going to come back to 2000 and take that away. So you can hear that sounds a lot more like a piano again. And there you have it. So I didn't really know how to use EQ in a sensible way before this week 5. What I've really taken from it is to listen to the parts as a whole, figure out what sounds best, what you're trying to get from each part, and then change the EQ to make space for the part where you want it to sound best. So what I did is, where I was really wanting the glossy high end of the violin, that's where I've got a little bit of a bump here, in between 8K and 12K. And that was why I then also cut these higher frequencies, because I didn't want there to be so much high end that the violins sounded harsh. So I just really wanted to hear a nice warm high end from the violins, and this was why I cut below 450 hertz. It was just really strongly impacting on how you then heard the piano, because there was so much stuff going on low down in the violins, because it was quite a big chord. Same with the piano. What I found was that if I left all of this information in above 8K, it's then you couldn't quite pick out the clarity of the violins as much. But what I also found was that if I cut too much below 8K, it didn't actually sound like a piano, and especially at around the 2K, you found that it didn't really work as a mix anymore. So that was what I learnt from this, and I hope that was helpful. Thank you.